Hello and welcome to episode 14 of the Ascension Speed Show. We are joined by Violet.
Hello.
And we are also joined by Scotch.
Hello.
Scotch, thank you again for joining us.
No problem, my man.
Where did your username come from?
It's not a particularly great story. I joined KOL back in 2004 in my high school programming class. And at that time, I was an extremely nerdy 14-year-old, unlike now, when I am a very cool,
super
cultured world traveler. I wanted to try and pick a username that would not betray that I was a huge nerd. So I decided I would pick some sort of naval ranking and an alcoholic beverage that I had never tried before.
It's a fine choice for the alcoholic beverages.
It worked out okay.
Well, by definition, it should age well.
Oh, I see what you did there.
I'm cutting that.
No, you are not cutting that. Do not cut that. I think it was like between Captain Scotch and like Admiral Vodka. I actually think I did have a multi at one point that was like Admiral Moonshine. So that was like back in the day when they actually deleted accounts. If you didn't get a Mr. Accessory, your account was like eligible for deletion.
I'm sure that purged many accounts.
It was like a inactivity thing. Like you had to be inactive for I think like 2 years or something. I don't know how many accounts actually got deleted. It would be interesting to look that up, but I didn't, so.
What got you reinterested in Kingdom of Loathing, or have you been playing it consistently since you started?
Not particularly consistently, so I'm one of those people that, as I just said, I started back in 2004, or 5, it was something in that range. I played pretty consistently after Ascension rolled out, so I had like a 2 or 3 year period where I just played a lot. And when I say play a lot, I don't mean I played very well. Just I really enjoyed the game. I did a bunch of Hobopolis stuff. I did a bunch of hardcore Oxy Ascensions. My first 15 Ascensions, in fact, were hardcore Oxy, which was a really great way to not get good at the game because you don't have to pay attention to food or booze.
Did it help you use your 40 turns well?
Yes and no. I feel like there were a few things that I did okay, but overall I'm glad that there are no logs of my 15 hardcore Oxy runs.
What got you interested in the speed game side of Kingdom of Loathing?
So the main reason that I used to play hardcore Oxy all the time was that I didn't want the game to take up too much time. So when I came back into the game, part of it was like, oh, this is a game that as I get better at it and as I get faster, runs will theoretically take less time because they'll take less turns. As we all know, that is not true in any way, shape, or form. But that was sort of like the lie that got me back into Kingdom of Loathing. And then by the time I realized that it was a lie, I was in too deep.
That is a fantastic lie.
I was looking at Lyft's KOLDB profile a few weeks ago and realized that Lyft has had significantly more runs than me. I've had 130, I think, at this recording. The big difference is that I have not automated a single run.
That is amazing.
Whereas Lyft has automated apparently like, what did you say? Like
268 CS runs.
I just find it really funny that I am a programmer in my day job. I am a data scientist for a financial consulting firm. But I've never really gotten into the whole like, CC Ascend or any of that kind of stuff. Mainly just because I feel like if I'm automating a game, then I don't really know why I'm playing it.
It is a strange thing to come to terms with.
Which is not to say that it is the wrong choice, because there are a lot of times I'm just like, God, I wish I had more skills, but I don't have time to, ascend every day. I think in the middle of like last year's standard, I came to the realization that you don't need to have all the skills. It's not even that much of a benefit. It just makes things somewhat more crowded on your screen. It is nice to have sometimes, and there's always fringe situations where you're just like, oh wow, it would be really great if I had this extra 5% init buff. It's not the be-all and end-all of like the speed game. As long as you have like the core like 60 to 100 skills, I think you can probably be reasonably competitive in KOL.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
Too much static in your audio? Pick up your pair of Space Trip safety headphones at the Game Grid Arcade today for only 1,000 tickets.
Violet, this is an exciting time. Normally, the PvP rewards don't have as much relevance in Ascension or Speed Ascension for that matter. What is different about this season?
The seasonal reward in the Swagger Shop is the Manual of Numberology, which is extremely Ascension relevant. You can buy one each season, but you can have up to 4 total. They are tradable, so you can get them in the mall. So even if you don't care about PvP or care about the reward, you still have a chance to make a large sum of meat.
And I mean, it's a considerable amount of meat. It's basically like a Mr. Accessory, right?
I think it's more. Isn't it like 50?
It might be 50 at this point, yeah. I think that prior to this season, if I remember correctly, it was at like 80, 83, something like that.
I'd say there's about 6 main uses for Calculate the Universe, which is the skill that comes from the manual. What is the most important one in Run?
The one that saves the most turns is probably the War 151 Infantryman. There's a 10% drop of the Frat Warrior Fatigues, which you can either try to cap with like a Champagne charge and a bunch of item buffs, or it's just a really good yellow ray target. And it saves a wish. It's just generally a very nice feather in your cap that you can do very early in Run.
Some of the other benefits of Frat Warrior Fatigues, they are fairly high damage absorption gear. So as soon as you have enough base muscle, moxie, or mysticality to equip them, they're probably going to be some of the best gear that you can equip as far as remaining safe.
Yeah, the Frat Warrior Fatigues are pretty fantastic for that. The way that I tend to think of Manual of Numberology is kind of a lesser but always standard deck of every card, in that it has a lot of different things that you can do with it. It's all kind of a little bit less powerful than you would get from a deck of every card, but it's always going to be in standard. You know, it still does things like +3 adventures, random booze, and instead of the stone wool that you can get from deck of every card, you can instead get the Knobgob perfume, which is just always a flat 1 adventure saved by enabling you to avoid either getting the perfume or fighting the madam.
One of the Calculate uses that I have been frequently using in Standard and also during the challenge path is Calculate 14, which gives you 14 Moxie Weege, which you can then auto-sell for 1400 meat. If you have more than 1 manual charge to spare, this is a great way to purchase, whether it's a meat car or all your hermit stuff, just right off the bat on turn 0. If you do not own a Bastille Battalion, or when that eventually rotates, Calculate 89 gives you 89 main stat, which puts you at about level, was it 3.5?
Something like that, yeah.
It's really nice that Mafia has that built-in support for Calculate the Universe.
That is a good point. If you type in the GCLI, Numberology, space, and then a number, so if you just type in Numberology, space 51, you can fight the Frat Warrior. I'm sure you have enough MP to disintegrate it.
Also, I will say, it is really, really nice that Mafia does that, and I did not learn this until my last run.
Ouch, how are you doing it before?
I was just going to the skills page, opening up Calculate, either like scrolling to the part of Ezendora's guide or using like Ezendora's online lookup tool and figuring out what to use.
Yeah, the Mafia support is exceptional and it's definitely a game changer.
With the new challenge path, is generating enough fights to earn this manual difficult?
It's not.
So what degeneracy is now possible with Too Crazy Random Summer and Fight Gen?
So one of the cool things about Too Crazy Random Summer is that all food and drink is sort of put in the same generator that will generate the actual new adventure gains of that food. All of the hard-coded stuff still happens. So what that means is that things like magical sausages, which are hard-coded to give you 999 MP, still give you 999 MP, they're just differently sized. The PvP fights are hard-coded, because food and drink doesn't usually give PvP fights. As a result, in Too Crazy Random Summer, all of those consumables give you adventures and PvP fights. It's really, really cool, especially in seeds like Accordion Thief Wombat. So, in AT Wombat, 5-hour acrimonies, it is a size 1 consumable in AT Wombat. Drink 15 of them. Then you can eat 5 Angstburgers, because those are size 3. Then you can have 15 Purple Beast energy drinks, because those are size 1, which gets you 245 PvP fights per day.
That's not even counting rollover or any of the other cheap sources of fight gen?
Nope. Just consumables.
We have some items of the month to catch up on. June brought us is it Hewn?
The Hewn Moon Spoon Cocoon?
Oh, jeez.
Hewn Rune Spoon?
The Rune Strewn Spoon Cocoon,
Ah, yes.
which when used gives us the Hewn Moon Rune Spoon.
I'm sorry, Lift, can you say that again, please?
Never again.
I don't think I caught it.
This spoon has 3 main features. It has a number of minor enchantments, such as +5 familiar weight or +3 stats per fight. Second thing it does is it breaks all Mafia tracking if you have the spoon equipped.
Huge feature.
Basically, Mafia tracking does not work, and that's a high price to pay if you have it equipped. The third thing the spoon does is it allows you to change your moon sign mid-run. The moon tuning ability in Standard presents a couple of new opportunities we haven't had before. What do you see yourself using the moon tuning effect for in the Standard path?
In general, I think that you probably are going to want to start in a null sign, get your meat car buff, get your bugbear outfit, get your untinker unlocked, and just get all of that kind of stuff done. Then probably switch to Marmot. Marmot is really, really nice. It gives you 2 extra clovers. Well, not 2, but 1 per day. So in a speedy run, you'll get 2 extra clovers from it. That really helps cut down on sort of the RNG factor of ascending on a few bad clover days. Generally speaking, clovers are an interesting resource because after you get a certain amount of them, you just don't really need them anymore. They aren't super useful beyond, I think, what's the number, 5 or 6.
And then after that, there's diminishing returns. If your account has the skills and or items of the month that allow you to wait until you hit level 12 to switch to Marmot, assuming a non-Moxie class. Don't you get that moon sign bonus of 10% experience gain?
That is correct. One thing that I would say is kind of one very minor counterpoint to that is that clovers will, assuming that the clover system doesn't change, they're probably going to be more important in next year's meta because we are going to lose the genie bottle.
Losing the genie as soon as January 2020 hits will change a lot of clover usage because our mob of Zeppelin protesters, we are wishing for dirty pair.
Yep.
Sometimes even the +100 sleaze damage.
Yep.
Without those easy sources, our optimization for that zone is going to change dramatically. So the other benefit to Marmot is the logging hatchet. Scotch, how do we find the logging hatchet and what does it do?
Non-combat that does not take a turn. Basically, you just step into, I think, camp, logging camp. You get a non-combat that drops the hatchet and then you're done. When you adventure in the Smut Orc camp with the hatchet equipped, you have an additional percentage chance of getting an extra plank. This can really help mitigate some of the RNG in that zone, because every one of the orcs has 2 drops. Or, 2 sort of notable drops for bridge building. 1 plank and 1 fastener. The thing is that some of them are 100% plank and 10% fastener, and some are 10% plank and 100% fastener.
Oh, I actually didn't know that. They're not all 10% drops?
Every single one of them has 1 100% drop and 1 10% drop. Does mean that you could potentially spend a macro in that zone if you've gotten a bunch of the 100% plank monsters and you know you're going to need another fastener. But just getting that extra plank can open up a few doors for you because it makes it a little bit easier to actually get the sort of 3 and 3 that you need to quickly finish that zone once you get the first non-combat. Again, it's a neat item of the month. I still think that the best enchantment whatsoever is that it breaks all of Mafia's tracking and makes my log parser complete garbage, but other than that, it's great.
In the challenge path, 2 Crazy Random Summer, the spoon allows us to double dip in 2 different seeds. What is the important thing to remember when we switch moon signs as far as active effects?
The active effects stay active even after your flip. Say that you've banked 600 turns of your general store buffs. Those are going to stay when you flip the moon sign.
Violet, does the moon tuning have any use in PvP?
It does, actually. Not in this particular season, but if there is a season that has competing moon sign minis, this could be very useful because you would be able to work different moon sign minis without ascending.
July's item of the month is the Beach Comb. This is an accessory which gives plus 20% to Moxie, MP regen, and plus 5 to familiar weight. But more importantly, it gives you access to combing the beach.
So what happens when you comb the beach?
So there are little beachheads that you can unlock to get 50 turn buffs. Standard KOL play, those are probably going to be what you end up using these on. You've got buffs for +3 resistance, +15 damage, +15 spell damage for every element. You also have +50 main stat buffs, a 5 stat per fight buff, and 5 familiar weight buff. You can only get 50 turns of each one of them every day. It's a pretty solid quality of life type thing. I think someone might have been Somersaulter or Tess was saying something along the lines of this is kind of a KGB replacement, in that the KGB gives you a bunch of 50 turn buffs when you're using it in standard. This doesn't have the sort of toggling effect stuff, but it still has similarly powerful buffs for the most part. So Lift, that's how you would tend to use it in standard. In 2CRS, is that different?
If you have 10 or more free combs remaining, you can grab a bunch of common items. Now in standard, that's not going to do a whole lot for you. It gives you all 3 of the meltable pieces of equipment, which are loaded with very, very small enchantments. In 2CRS, though, that gives them different enchantments depending on the seed, as well as seashells that can give you something fantastic like Covetous Robbery in Seal Coupler Opossum, and the Kelp Spleen item, as well as a bunch of sea grapes, which in standard is just a size 1 awesome booze. I think it's 4.5 adventures per drunk.
Depending on what our options look like next year, maybe it'll be useful.
What'll happen is we'll use, maybe 6 to 8 of those beachhead buffs, and then we're going to have a handful of just free combs, and so whatever we scrounge up, there's no way we're going to use all 11 on the beachcomb buffs, right?
Yeah, that is fair. I don't think we're planning on discussing, but it's probably worth mentioning. There is a bunch of rare gear. There's an hourglass you can build using the comb, and there's a devilishly complicated puzzle that at time of podcasting has not been remotely solved yet.
There was also a post in the Kingdom of Loathing forums by Hot Stuff answering a question. Grabbing the common items felt a bit restrictive since it uses 10 of your 11 free combs. There was mention that potentially after the challenge path ended, they could revisit how many free combs that would use. Too Crazy Random Summer. The challenge path launched May 15th. It was a wild introduction because for at least a month afterward, Mafia had no support. There was ongoing spading by the community. Scotch, you have made a number of helpful spreadsheets to summarize some of the quirks of Too Crazy Random Summer.
So the first sheet that I made is the 2CRS cheat sheet. I basically think of it as a bunch of flashcards. So the 2CRS cheat sheet essentially takes these 7 useful buffs, things like Stone-Faced, which we don't really think about that much on a normal run, but is essentially run-breaking if you don't have it. Dirty Pair, something that we currently wish in almost every iteration of the run. One Very Clear Eye, Covetous Robbery, Super Skill, which is less something that you need and more something that's just kind of fun. But just a bunch of flashcards for, hey, are you looking to jump into 2CRS? You're not super convinced about I'm just going to do what everyone else is doing and do Club POS. What are some other seeds to look at? That would generally be where I would start.
Excellent. Scotch, you have made a second spreadsheet.
I made a information generator, essentially, that would pull out all relevant items from things like Pulverize, all NPC stores, all of your items of the month, and tried to figure out, okay, if you split it into one sheet for each class, what is the effect for each of these in every single path? I have a sort of version 1 of this spreadsheet where I have a bunch of manual notes, and then I have a version 2 of the spreadsheet which is more updated, has more effects, is a little bit cleaner and easier to read, but it doesn't have some of my manual notes. In some of the old sheets, when I was figuring out path combinations, I grayed out stuff that was essentially useless. That is not on the most recent version of it yet. Although if you would like to help me out with it, just let me know. And to be clear, beyond these sheets, when I'm ascending in 2CRS, I will often have the Plastic Lobster effect and item pages up, just because they're really useful resources. I know Plastic Lobster is currently doing some work on trying to break the code of how Mafia is storing everything, interface it with his database, and then update everything automatically. Hopefully that'll be done in the next few weeks.
Scotch, you've been hard at work with another fantastic summary document, and you're calling this one the 2CRS Overview Question and Answer, a frequently asked questions document. Tell us a little bit about this.
I feel like one of the things that is the hardest about 2CRS is that just about everyone has the same questions, and it's really, really hard for people to just constantly answer them every time, especially because the answers are going to be a little bit different depending on what you're coming in with. For example, the best seed for someone with a full suite of items of the month might not actually be the best seed for someone without that full suite. It probably overlaps pretty well, but there are a few things that are important to keep in mind, especially if you're going in without the sort of full standard suite that everyone's used to. So one of the things that I wanted to do with the Q&A was just take, hey, what are all of the things that might be keeping people from playing the path, or things that are hard to understand before you enter the path, and let's just try and summarize them, try and get everything out in the open, and hopefully, like, my personal hope is that this document will cause more questions that I can then add to the document and keep iterating on it. I do wish that I had had a less busy July so that I could have posted this up a little bit earlier. C'est la vie. There's still about a little over 2 weeks of the season left. We've got some time. If people want to jump in, I highly recommend it. I would like to maintain gold. Right now, I get to see my name up there.
Okay, so we haven't actually given a quick summary of 2CRS, so can you just summarize the challenge path?
If you boil it down, every single piece of equipment that had an enchantment was randomized and now gives a different enchantment, as well as consumables, their size, their quality, all been changed, and each potion now gives a randomized effect. Now, when we say randomized, what we mean is each seed or class moon sign combination will stay the same throughout your entire run. So each run, if you ascend in the same moon sign and class, those effects will remain consistent, but randomized in a sense that there are actually 54 different combinations based on the class and the 9 different moon signs. So 54 paths for the price of 1.
So if there's 54 paths, how do you expect to keep them all straight?
The primary way you keep them straight is by not playing 54 paths. One of the nice things about 2CRS is that it gives you a lot of different ways to play the game if you would like, but if you would like to just play fast, and you probably just want to pick one that seems like it fits with your item of the month suite and fits with everything that you need from your paths, and just get to know that general route. So most speed players right now are currently playing Seal Clover Possum. If they have the spoon, they're usually transitioning from Seal Clover Vole into Seal Clover Possum. But as a result, people that do that can get to know that specific seed and get used to some of the little item-based quirks that the seed causes.
It rewards you really getting to know the seed.
That makes sense. So why would you play this challenge path instead of standard?
So there's basically 3 reasons why I think someone would pick 2CRS over standard. The first being that you just have really, really strange, weird buffs that you can get for the entire run. In some paths, you can have Covetous Robbery for your entire run. In some paths, you get plus 100% item drops for your entire run. Some paths, you get 25 prismatic damage your entire run, or you can spend the entire run with superstructure and 500 damage absorption. There's just a bunch of weird stuff that you can spend the entirety of your run doing that in a normal run you would be unable to do.
What's also fun is you get to learn about some of these effects that if you're primarily playing standard, you never get to see because it has long since rotated.
Is there any downsides of 2CRS?
Yeah, so one big one is that 2CRS is significantly slower than standard.
Someone's cooking.
Duncan is cooking. Give me 1 second.
Another thing 2CRS does, like most challenge paths, is change up which item of the months are most useful. So some things like Pentagram, doesn't matter what you configure the Pentagram to, it will always have the same random enchantments that the seed gives it. So its value goes down. And something Also, like the KGB, you can't set the briefcase enchantments, so you have no way to toggle between, say, plus or minus combat or the plus monster level. But it allows things like the hopeful candle to shine. One of the ways to shape the melted wax results in an accessory that is 25 monster level and plus 15% item drop. So that's a fantastic accessory that I wish I could have in standard.
It's pretty cool. You know, it's not cool. My dog just making the audio of him drinking water in the background of everything I say right now. So things that are potential issues with 2CRS. The first one, and the one that's kind of, I wouldn't say a deal breaker, but is an important one to note, is that it is slower than standard because you have a significantly longer war. 2 of the side quests that you normally would do are actually impossible to do in 2CRS, which leaves you doing the 3 side quests that you normally start with, and then later in the war you do ducks to save, I think, about 8 to 9 turns, depending on how you end up doing ducks and how it actually works. So that's not great. That means that your war ends up being something like 125, 170 turns instead of 120 or something like that. I mean, it's a good plus 40, plus 50 turns on your run. In concert with that, because of the way that consumption or consumables have been randomized, you end up with usually slightly lower quality consumables. So you end up with this sort of weird thing where the run takes more turns, but there's a little bit less turn gen to actually make that happen. I think it's a lot easier to fail out of a 2-day run in 2CRS than it is in actual standard. And 2-day runs are reasonably difficult in standard, which is one of the reasons why the current leaderboard for 2CRS is not particularly dotted with the 2-day hardcore runs.
Consumption is strange in that, like, you're going to generate probably less turns, but you can kind of guarantee that each consumable is going to give you about 5 adventures per organ.
Yep. On the subject of current speed of path, there are only 12 people that have done a 2-day hardcore 2CRS so far, which this late in a season, there's a definite possibility that by the end of the season there are still going to be bronzes that get 3-day runs, which I think is pretty interesting.
Another downside is that if you're not playing with Mafia, it can be painstaking because you will need to click on most of the potions or just memorize flat out what they do, because you won't be able to just use your go-to standard effects.
That's the thing with 2CRS, is like, it's a very fun, very interesting path. There are a lot of weird decisions that it forces you to make, but it also has a little bit less margin of error in a few ways. And if you are not using Mafia and if you're not used to the seed, it can be a little bit of a slog, especially for your first few runs as you kind of get used to it.
It's got a little higher barrier of entry, but there is a lot of room to really explore its depth.
This is very much the core game is the same, but every single thing around the edges of that has changed, and you have to adapt to it.
What are some examples of seed-specific routing divergences?
So there are a few things that 2CRS unlocks that you don't really have access to in standard right now. One of them is that if you would like to use your day 1 champagne charges on something, it's perfectly reasonable to use them on junk sprites. Those briefly came back as a result of Phil doing some wacky theory crafting during Dark Gift. And when I say wacky, I mean wacky in a good way. It was it was an interesting thing to point out. But in Dark Gift, you could reasonably hit 900% item drop. The same thing is true in 2CRS. And at 900% item drop, it breaks even. If you can get above 900% item drop, it has a chance of saving you 2 turns off of using the shore. It also gives you a few more combats early in run, which is actually kind of nice. You really, really want to get as many combats as possible before the war starts. So another really nice one is just leveling can be significantly faster. In a lot of seeds, you can find examples of weird pieces of equipment that have like plus 10% to your main stat, plus like pretty large flat scalars to your main stat, so like plus 5 muscle stats per fight, plus 3 muscle stats per fight, etc. Once you get enough of that stacked up, I mean, you can look at leveling much, much faster than you do in Standard. Me and Lift, I think, have both had runs where we end up at level 12 by turn 40, which is something that was pretty common in the meta last year, not so common this year.
In the softcore run, I think I had 1900 buffed main stat, and that was like turn 21.
Just absolutely wild. Another kind of neat thing that leveling unlocks is that if you can level that high early, that gives you a lot of control over where you put your individual quests. So let's say that you've got the war unlocked by turn 50, then you can start flyering and doing a bunch of other quests while you flyer. This is also true in Standard, but the faster you level, the more kind of like weird routing that unlocks.
And a lot of these plus main stat percentage buffs come from generally obtainable items. Bengal Bomb or Glittery Mascara.
I don't think that this is particularly common in Vol, but in some of the other paths, you can end up with really, really good items just straight out the gate by using chewing gum. So almost all of that, sort of the initial gear that you get from the chewing gum, the starting gear like the mariachi hat, the helmet turtle, the saucepan, etc., stuff like that, a lot of it has very, very small buffs in Standard. Things like +1 range damage or +1 mysticality, etc. In 2CRS, that also gets randomized, and for some items, that ends up being some really, really cool stuff. So I remember there's one seed, and I don't remember which one it was, but a disco mask is something like 25 monster level. Or the ravioli hat in Club Pos gives +3 muscle substats. Or in, I think, one of the accordion thieves, one of the items gave you +50 sleaze damage.
Even in Club Possum, something as mundane as summon cocktail crafting really determines a lot of your early routing, whether or not you get a little paper umbrellas. Each of those is +50 sleaze damage, which is incredibly useful for doing the mob of Zeppelin protesters.
In 2CRS, people that don't necessarily have the standard suite needed to tower kill can usually get enough stuff to tower kill. Spell damage percent is really, really common in 2CRS. It's something that by the end of a run, you're going to have dozens of items that give it. The same goes for the Wall of Skin, where you might not actually have enough standard sources to kill it, but because all of the potions are randomized, you probably can get things like a Gummy Badass or the Pygmy Drinking Buddy, or the one effect that you get from like the Think Nerd robots that gives you +1 damage per turn on that. There's a lot of just like very minor stuff that almost lets you use 2CRS as a test of how you would do something if you had more shinies than you actually did. This actually was the path where I finally got a full standard suite. So I now actually do have all of the shinies, but before I had all the shinies, like if this was the challenge path last year, the year before, I think I would have enjoyed it a lot for a lot of those kinds of reasons as well. One of the other, I wouldn't say nice things, because for most of the run this is an extremely negative thing, but one of the enchantments you can get on random items is minus monster level. That can be pretty awful in early run, especially if it's on something that you really want to have equipped. There are some seeds where you get minus monster level on the Cramco, and that's not good. But when it comes to killing the Naughty Sorceress, it is kind of nice to be able to put minus monster level in your modifier maximizer and go into that fight with like minus 100 monster level. What in 2CRS do you wish and banish for? Is it super different from standard? Are there like crazy new banishes that you do in 2CRS? Are there crazy new wishes?
Well, let's talk about wishes first. You actually have more wishes because +100 sleaze damage, 50 ways to bereave your lover, completely unnecessary in the Seal Clubber Opossum because we have so many sources of sleaze damage. And so that can be used on something you might normally calculate the universe for instance, the 151 Frat Orc. You can wish for other monsters that give you the Frat Warrior fatigues, but also perhaps drop something else that's useful.
There are a number of different Frat Orcs that you can wish. Standard, even if you were going to wish them, they don't really drop anything that's valuable. But in 2CRS, it's actually kind of a big deal. Let's say Club Possum, there's one of the items that'll give you +50 sleaze damage. There's one wish where you can wish for something that'll give you a sleaze wad that can be converted into a hot wad to give you a plus 20% muscle experience buff. There's a lot of very like weird intricacies and tweaks that you can do to your wish list because it's just a little bit more open in 2CRS than it is in standard. One thing to keep in mind is that if you are in a seed that doesn't have stone-faced, you need to wish for stone-faced. That is the most valuable wish that you can do if you are in that situation, just because without stone-faced, the temple can take anywhere from like 10 turns to 60 turns.
The other wishes are more standard fare, so Mountain Man is on the short list. A very convenient way to get your ore, especially in combination with a Kitten Burglar Heist. Grops, since the nerf, are not as valuable, but on day 2, there's definitely more than enough room to fit in a wish for a Green Op Soldier. And then you have some wishes that are a little more marginal, so you can use them kind of as flex. If you get an extremely fast desert, you could wish for a blur and get your drum machine that way, or just cut the tails on zones with a lot of monsters. For instance, wishing for a Bob, olfact it.
Theoretically, do a blooper wish combined with, I think, 4 sabers and an exo pocket, or 3 exo pockets, and just completely not have to worry about that zone and save a turn. The problem is that does use up 4 sabers, which is a lot to use up on day 1.
It depends on how many banishes you have.
It depends on how many banishes, and it depends on if you're using sabers.
Banishes are mostly the same. If you're in a zone, it's a really great zone to use a banish.
So banishes in, say, Club Possum are basically exactly the same. There aren't any monsters that are off the beaten path in any real way. Occasionally, you will be playing a seed where there's something that in normal play you would banish, but you might not want to banish there. A good example of this would be the Pygmy Blowgunner in Sorcerer Platypus. The Pygmy Dart from the Pygmy Blowgunner gives you, I believe, 47 turns of one very clear eye. It's probably worth not banishing them and actually fighting a few of them just to get basically 150 turns of plus 100% item drops. Assuming that it's not off the beaten path, which it wouldn't be if you were encountering them in the hidden park.
Oh, we haven't even mentioned Avatar Potions. So the monster manual...
It's optimal in this path.
In Too Crazy Random Summer, the Avatar Potions, which normally don't do anything, have random effects as well.
Which is honestly hilarious.
It's really great.
There are a bunch of just like weird Avatar Potions that are suddenly very valuable. In Sorcerer Wallaby, Flask of Rainwater gives one very clear eye. In Disco Bandit Marmot, the Punk Patch from the top floor of the castle gives Dirty Pear. Sorcerer Possum, Zombie Hollandaise from the Haunted Kitchen gives the plus minus combat affirmation,
Ooh.
which is kind of neat.
Do any of the items in the game give an avatar effect?
Yes, actually. For some reason, and I don't know why I know this, but there is one avatar effect that is hookable, which is Robo Camo. So you can actually get Robo Camo randomized in a lot of seeds. So Seal Clubber Mongoose, the twinkly powder, does actually give you an avatar effect.
Nice.
So you could spend the entirety of your Seal Clubber Mongoose Ascension dressed as a robot.
Sounds optimal.
So you mentioned that the equipment enchantments can be randomized. Are there any enchantments that aren't randomized?
The long story short, most things with special text. Short story long, a lot of them, but not all of them. So enchantments that are somewhat special and hard-coded to be attached to the item still work. Things that are not hard-coded gets turned into, just swapped into the normal 2CRS bucket. So a few relevant examples is that the Broken Champagne Bottle has several of its enchantments swapped into the 2CRS enchantments, but it still does double item drop for 11 charges per day. The same thing is true with the Makeshift Garbage Shirt, and to a lesser degree of importance, the tree.
Deceased Crimbo Tree.
Yeah, that's it. There are, however, some weird ones where you would actually think that it would be hard-coded, but it isn't. So, an example is the Pirate Realm eye patch, which is a huge problem. So, the Pirate Realm eye patch is supposed to restrict your stats to 10 apiece. This does not actually happen in 2CRS. It's just replaced with one random enchantment. The big problem here is that Pirate Realm does not let you enter unless your stats are under 100. As a result, if Pirate Realm is your only source of a third fat loot token, you basically need to do that first thing on day one. Because if you don't, as soon as you put on a lot of your 2CRS buffs, your stats are going to be over 100, and it's going to become impossible for you to enter Pirate Realm.
Yeah, that's miserable.
The same is true of the Fantasy Realm gem, where it usually would restrict your stats. It doesn't in 2CRS. The difference is that in Fantasy Realm, it doesn't matter what your stats are. You just have to be wearing the gem to go in. That one is not nearly as bad. Another kind of weird one is the Kremlin's Greatest Briefcase. So you can still toggle all of your tabs and set the effects as you like. It just doesn't do anything. The KGB has a permanently seeded effect for each seed, and that's just going to be what it is, no matter what you do with your tabs.
And then there's an exception to the exception, which is the latte.
So the latte is one of the few toggling items that actually lets you toggle. As you get your latte enchantments, they will be applied to be the normal latte that you know and love, a latte.
So what are the best 2CRS enchantments to look for?
Well, assuming that you're using Mafia, you probably won't be looking at the names of these items very much. But if you're using vanilla KOL, there are probably 5 or so enchantments that I would recommend you watch out for. One is Misspelled Jim Carrey, which gives your item plus 25 monster level. One is the End of the Effect modifier of Mayonnaise, which gives plus 50 sleeve spell damage. The item modifier Sherlock's gives you plus 25% item drops. Of the Early Riser gives plus 7 adventures at rollover, and of the Glutton gives 100% food drops.
Consumption is very strange in seeds. The one I'm most familiar with is seal-colored possum, and your diet basically consists of hot dogs with a ton of ketchup and base bottles of rum.
That sounds...
It sounds frankly awful. Ugh.
Let's just abstract this for a second. In 2 Crazy Random Summer, your character is even more unhealthy than they are in the normal KOL game. You're playing a character that is just drinking bottles of ketchup while eating 1 hot dog.
And washing that down with a bottle of rum.
3 bottles of rum, let's be clear.
Yes.
And then drinking some psychotic train wine to end the day. I feel really bad for Captain Scotch, the character, right now.
It is worse than normal. There is nothing on your stomach. Like ketchup?
It's just ketchup!
It's just ketchup and booze.
It's like a Bloody Mary.
Oh, that's nasty!
It's like a really, really broke Bloody Mary.
Oh my god. That is... Yeah. Yep. That's what it is. Going back to the actual, like, how consumption works. Why are we drinking ketchup all the time? Why in the world are beverages so good in 2CRS?
I don't know why.
I was hoping that...
I don't know.
I was hoping that you knew.
Beverages are not booze. Beverages are food items, and all of the beverages are amazing.
So the fact that they're all size 1 is weird. I don't know whether that was on purpose, but I do think that they are pulling from the booze, like, adventure tier instead of the food adventure tier, despite the fact that they're food.
Epic booze is easy to find. It's everywhere. Food worth eating, not so much.
If you look at anything with the classification of food in the game, none of it is epic. It is impossible to find epic food in 2CRS. But it does seem like with beverages, they just sort of either overlooked the fact that beverages are food, or they just kind of figured, they would throw one bone to turn gen.
So what perm skills are more or less valuable in 2CRS than in standard?
There are a lot of skills that are sort of differentially valuable. There are also a lot of skills that are pretty much the same. So things like Fat Loot Lyric, that's going to be useful whether you're in a standard run or a 2CRS run. So there's going to be a Word document attached to this that you guys can look through. I don't think we're going to go through all of these skills because there's quite a lot of them. But I think the big one, and the one that we probably should highlight, is Pulverize.
Pulverize is crazy strong, and it's really fun learning how this skill works because you don't use it enough in Standard.
You don't want to ascend into CRS until you have Pulverize, I think. I think that it is strong enough and useful enough for any character of any skill level
Yes.
that you're just going to want to have it. The thing with Pulverize that makes it so good in 2CRS is that nuggets and powder are both potions. That means that their effects get randomized and thrown in the exact same pool as every other potion. You never realize how much stuff in a normal run is smashable and actually gives you these kinds of powders and nuggets until you're in 2CRS and you actually open the Pulverize window and realize how much of this you can create. Essentially, in a normal KOO run, you should be able to get enough Twinkly Powder to run whatever that buff is for the entirety of your run. There are certain ones that are easier to get than others. So after the war, you can convert all of your coins into kick-ass kicks to get a bunch of sleaze nuggets. That's really, really useful in Steel Clubber Possum because in Steel Clubber Possum, sleaze nuggets give you plus 40% item drop, plus 2 familiar weight, and a bunch of meat drop and resistance alongside that, because it gives you the effect Thanks Got. There are also just a bunch of other really cool things that you can get from it, like extra item drop, prismatic damage, MP boosts, etc. It's really, really interesting to see what Pulverize actually gives you from seed to seed, and it gives you a better understanding of kind of what kind of stuff drops in a normal run that you never even think about using.
The Way of Sauce is, alongside Pulverize, also useful because you can convert your nuggets, your wads from one to another by combining it with the Twinkly Nugget. So you can actually turn, if you have enough Twinkly Nuggets and all the other wads, you can actually convert any wad to any other wad.
Before jumping into a 2CRS run, I would highly recommend grabbing the 2 Madame Zatara VIP skill books that let you summon things. So the Rhinestones and Love Potions, both of them are very useful in most seeds. They basically just give you another buff that you can run for the entirety of your run, which is neat.
And they're auto hardcore permed.
Yes.
Scotch, thank you so much for, first of all, preparing all of these helpful documents, which I use all the time, as well as making some time to come and talk about Too Crazy Random Summer, which is a path that really has grown on me. I didn't think I would like it as much. I ended up really enjoying it. Thank you again for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
No problem, man. We do want to talk very briefly about Violet and I. This lift, you can kind of like step out for this part.
Okay, you guys have a good one.
We want to talk about what's really hot in the world of dogs right now. Duncan wanted me to say sticks. Sticks are great.
Well, Lift broke the podcast.